Welcome to the Risk and Assurance Committee for Wednesday, the 14th of February, 2024. Right, I'm going to have a look at my little instructions here. So we have received an apology from His Worship Mayor Guppy. So I'll move. Are there any other apologies? If not, I will move that the apology from Mayor Guppy be accepted and leave of absence be granted. A second, please. Councillor Bentley, any discussion? If not, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. And before we move on to declaration of interest, we have councillors who are not on the committee. Councillor Hammond is one. That's all we have, I think. All right. Okay, so Councillor Hammond, do you wish to have speaking rights?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll move that Councillor Hammond be given speaking rights for this committee. Or second, please. Councillor Bentley, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare a conflict of interest for any of these items on today's agenda?
No.
Thank you. There's none. Public forum, we don't have any people who wish to speak to us today. So we'll move straight then into the first page of the recommendations from the Dentons Kensington Swan report. Let's move, we'll do as what we usually do. This report, we'll just go through each recommendation. So we'll start off with number 2. And my question here is that it has NA for February 2024 update. I understand this now item has been completed and can be closed off, but can you confirm that, please, General Counsel?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a rolling, it's an ongoing thing to do, but yeah, we're up to date.
So is everyone happy for it to be completed and closed off? Okay.
Yeah, excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
Could we just though put in there that it's now business as usual?
Thank
even
you.
though it's
Right, so it's been completed.
Yeah.
It's business as usual and keep it closed off. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are you, is the committee comfortable that we will remove items as they are completed? And move
Yes,
to BAS?
yes, that's been the procedure previously.
Thank you.
Item number 3, refer to a separate paper this committee proposing to update the delegation, so that will be, we'll get to that paper. So that will remain open. Recommendation number 4, we have an NA, so both for the two bits of this. So can someone first of all explain why we have NA for complete the LGMI management now with the legal team? Can someone talk about the recruitment processing, please, General Counsel?
So
Okay.
I think this is the same. This is the same as point 2, which is that it's now complete. So we have.
Okay, so that bit's complete. So we can close off. Thank you. And the second part of it under planning, can the director please explain why we have N/A not available?
Chair, it's exactly the same situation.
Same thing?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we can close that one off too. So item.
Chair, could I just,
Councillor, yes.
but it is ongoing
It is.
as
It is.
business as usual? Yeah.
So it's completed, business as usual, and we can close it off. So we can close off item number 4 because the environmental health is also complete and can be closed off. And business as usual. We now come to recommendation number 5. Any comments on recommendation 5? Councillor Swale?
I just wanted to check, are we still on time with regard to the schedule for it to go to ELT, which is, there's a specific date there, the 11th of March, 2024, knowing that the workload at the moment with all council officers is quite heavy with the LTP.
Through each year. Look, it's you're correct. It's a very heavy workload, but yes, it is on track to get there.
So if we just leave it open until our next Risk and Assurance Committee meeting?
Through Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to recommendation 6, it's the same sort of thing. We're still confident that you can meet the march.
Chair, yes,
Okay.
I am, yeah. And just for total clarity, I'll just make a point, it is there in the text, but the enforcement policy and compliance strategy, they've been combined. They are, so the team are currently working through technical review.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 10, recommendation 7. Again, we have another one going on the 11th of March, still the same answer.
Thank you, Chair, yes.
Then we move to recommendation 8. Now we're talking about scheduled for May, June. Are we still confident that's going to happen?
Chair, everything at this stage is on track. Again, I just acknowledge the previous question, there's heavy workload. Yes.
Right, so I'll just presume it'll come to the May, June.
Thanks, Chair.
Certainly.
Could I just ask a question on that in terms of, is it workload that's driven the delay until May or other things?
Through you, Chair. Combination of things. It has been mostly workload. We have also just had a number of key enforcement matters that we've been looking at alongside drafting. So there's just been a lot of live activity in that space. It is primarily workload, but in drafting we've been tweaking, and that's why we have actually made the recent decision to combine compliance and enforcement, the strategy and the policy. So that has fed into some of the delay.
Thank you.
Moving down to 9, which has been labelled as complete and now implemented. Here, Councillor Swale.
I think it's important because of this report that anything to do with the RMA, that the Director of Planning and Regulatory Services is linked in with the forms that goes out, and that's not stipulated in here. But my recommendation is it is that entity or that department is looped in. The Director is.
Through you, Chair. Can I just clarify that a little bit? Is that in relation to item 9?
Yes, current practices to prepare full communications under status as of the, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Acknowledge. Yes, agree.
Yeah, and it's also related to being proactive rather than reactive. So try and second guess what may or may not happen. Yeah, thank you. So we can now agree to close off 9
With that, yes,
with that proviso.
absolutely, thank you.
And 14, I understand, is completed now. Am I correct?
It is, Chair. Correct.
Is everyone happy to close that off?
Yeah.
Right. And 15 and 16, I think should still remain open in the meantime. Is everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Okay, fine, right. So with those item recommendations now considered and those that we have agreed to close off, I'll move that the committee recommends that the council receives and notes the report titled Recommendations from the Dentons Kensington Swan Report. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Swales. Is there any debate on the motion? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to the delegations update. Now, as you plough your way through this, the new proposed delegations start on page 80. So after the council paper, from page 1819 through to page 79 is the current delegations manual. And then the proposed one, which obviously is a lot slimmer and a lot shorter. So I'll open it up for any comments and debate. Councillor Swales.
I have an issue actually with this particular paper, Chair, and the issue that I have is that I don't believe that there is enough information, pre-information as to why we are being asked to make some of these changes. I find it a little bit light on the argument or the persuasion of why these suggested arguments are there. I also found it really difficult to track changes. There were no identified changes when we were looking from the original to the second. I had to split them out so that I could try it didn't make it easy either with the change in format. There were some confusing things that were in here in the new article that they've increased the people that can sign off on things, but there's no articulation as to whether all of those people need to sign off or whether it's one or two or three or whatever. It's just got a whole lot of designated people that can sign off on it. So my recommendation would be that it goes back to the officers, gives us a bit more, rationale between the changes that are being suggested, why they're being tidied up, a track change for us to easily digest, and it should possibly come back to full council.
Other comments from council? Thank you, Sarah.
Can I just second that slightly, in that I will say I also found it a little bit difficult to work through what the variations and changes. So a schedule of changes would have been quite useful to understand it. As a risk and audit committee member, if we do that, I would still quite like to have the opportunity to do some form of email feedback on that before it goes through to full council.
Thank you. And I'll put it on my tuppence worth too. So on page 83, under paragraph 5A, you'll see that the financial delegation, the chief executive delegation to enter into contracts is limited to a total contract cost of 1 million, unless the contract is in respect of a project where both the project and the project cost is approved and budgeted for a long-term plan or an annual plan, or has been specifically approved by council. In my mind, this gives the chief executive far too much power, and that any the principles are that a long-term plan and an annual budget are just that. They are a budget and a plan. And then the next step then is to go through and obviously, for example, the costs could be different in the long-term plan and in the annual plan with inflation. And to my mind, it just gives far too much power. For example, big capital projects, whether they be 5 million or more. And if this had been for the pool, for example, 50 million or 44 million, the original was, then that would give me great concern and a really lack of governance. So this was actually has been discussed by myself, council officers, and deputy mayor on Monday at the chairs meeting. And so councillors may recall that we did have a contracts committee. And that contracts committee, although its terms of reference was a little bit, wasn't explicit, thank you. We still had a contracts committee of about 3 councillors who actually considered the contracts to be elect, and also that reported back through the appropriate committee for approval. And so I'm proposing that that we ask officers to bring back a paper on the process and options available to re-establish a contracts committee and to give it power to approve significant contracts, whatever that means in terms of being fleshed out. So obviously it's going to be a dollar value. So my concern was that 5A was too open and really started to breach some of our governance obligations as a risk and assurance committee and also the finance and performance committee. So there is a recommendation I'm going to put to the committee. Councillor Griffith.
Can I just ask some clarification around that? You're talking about the contracts committee based on through some councillors, and you said that they would make decisions around that. Would they then come back to
recommendations? Yeah, recommendations. Sorry, yeah, come back to the appropriate committee, whether it be policy, finance, performance, or full council, or whatever. And that's what happened.
Yeah,
I think it got dropped somehow the last training. I can't remember if it was the last training or this training that got dropped.
Could we also ask why it was dropped? What's happened to it?
Director?
I think there's some dollars on.
Question for the mayor.
Or chief executive?
governance, councillors rather than officers.
Yeah, I think it was a mere decision, but I don't think it was clarified with councillors. And I don't think councillors really understood that it had been dropped. So, yeah. So, is there any more discussion on this paper? If not, I propose that the recommendations that are on the paper in that 100 pages, on page 15 to Roman numeral 1 through to 7 be amended as follows. So Roman numeral 1, we receives and notes the report titled Delegations Update. So I'm going to move that. I'm a seconder. Councillor Griffiths, or any discussion? All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Carry, thank you. Then for recommendations, Roman numeral 2 through to Roman numeral 7, thank you. My proposal is that we defer those recommendations to a further finance and insurance committee in order for the risk insurance committees, in order for the delegations to be clarified, for example, track changing, etc., and some of the issues that we've raised today be included.
Through you, Chair. One of the things I'm really conscious of is that there are some elements of the delegations that are quite out of date.
Yes.
And which I think was one of the things where I think Helen was suggesting that it goes back to full council. I would be all comfortable as the independent member being the only one who's not sitting at full council, doing effectively providing my feedback via around just as an
Yes,
email,
Yep.
rather than it having to come out as and be deferred all the way through to another risk and assurance committee, given we don't meet that regularly.
But the paper, well,
So you said.
G, the Roman numeral 7 alludes to something that may or may not happen. So that's why delegations may have to be come back and changed in your own, depending what happens, given the long-term plan. So, so obviously the paper needs to be changed, better explained, etc.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
how long that takes, I don't know, that depends on the director or directors. So really it's over to the officers then to work out what the time frame might be.
Without being out of turn, we might be back at the next risk and assurance.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
That works for me.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Without being out of turn.
Which is May,
Our
isn't it?
timeline might be May anyway.
yeah,
We might be, but I'll discuss it.
yeah. Councillor Newell?
Yeah, thank you, because it is about the timing. So what are the implications if this is not adopted
Carry on.
We carry on.
as with the old version?
Existing.
So, yeah, so what are the implications of that?
That's why we wanted to
Before
make
you
changes.
There's no obvious risk. These are, as alluded to earlier, these are a little bit old and out of date. They work, but they're not the best. They could be far better.
I think if I might, I mean, the reality is that every day at the moment, council officers are making decisions for which they do not have a delegation. They're assigning things that they're not entitled to. They're making decisions without a correct delegation because the current manual is unclear. So the intention here was to roll us onto a more up-to-date document format without changing the delegations. So the delegations slide across just in a better format, and then we could go through a directorate by directorate review of the delegations against the new format in a more clear way. So just to manage expectations, I won't be able to bring back a track changes version of the current document because I'm not changing the current document. It's so there should be no real changes in between these two documents in terms of delegations. There are a couple that we've highlighted that have changed, like the employment delegation, but otherwise it should be shipped on. And then the proposal will go through directorate by directorate and ask directors to review whether or not the delegations set out in the new manual were what they needed and whether the powers are in the right place. So for example, the delegation to the the $1 million that you took us to, that's the current delegation.
So can I then ask, does that explanation change the opinion of those who wanted this delayed to another meeting?
Do you mind if I say something?
Yeah,
I understand that it's a lot, there's a lot. So I'm happy to come back with more voluminous explanations
Thank you.
to give you more comfort.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do, but it won't, like Kate says, it won't be until May, because it is a very difficult, the current document is hard to work with. It doesn't tell you really what the delegations are. For example, in the RMA space, we just say, these officers have all the powers under the RMA without specifying what they are. So it's hard to work with. And so it's also hard to cross-reference through to a new document. So what I can bring back is it'll be a deeper explanation of what we've done rather than a track changes version of the document, if that makes sense. But I think it's important that you feel comfortable that it makes sense.
And in the meantime, the discussion about the contracts committee and its delegations can also be resolved, hopefully. in that time.
I'm a little bit reluctant to say, I think it's risky to say we're moving to a new document format and at the same time changing these delegations. It just makes it a massive task. But maybe on that one, we can do that one.
So, right.
And
So-
I think if I can add one thing, we're trying to not bring here operational matters. So we're trying not to get into too much
Yeah,
detail
yeah.
to take to an operational level,
Yeah.
being mindful of the CEO's delegations.
So the recommendation is still to defer recommendations 2 through to Roman 7 until the main risk and assurance committee with officers to provide a bit, an improved,
And also something about the contracts.
yes.
I do remain concerned about the comment that Guy's going though, that in the interim, that means that people are acting outside of delegation. And what does that actually mean in terms of, risks to the council? So I guess I'm probably trying to go, is it, there's some things here that are slightly unclear for me in terms of, where I say it's got delegations and I go, does that mean all or none or
Yeah.
one or more? Which I think could be relatively easy tidy ups. And I just wonder whether there is an opportunity to do something quicker that would actually, move the council to an in compliant state, but it may not be perfect, and then actually have another version coming up in May. So something considered at council quicker and earlier, so that we can get to that, and then actually have a more substantial thing coming up that might, also review the actual delegations by people and get another cut done.
Yeah, the point is that the business about the contracts group committee, we want to have discussed, resolved for the main risk and assurance group regardless, because I'm not agreeing to approve this paper unless that has, me personally, I'm not happy with that clause 5A standing at the moment. I'm prepared to let it go through to the need to, if we agree to the amended motion about looking at re-establishing the contracts committee and bring that back for the main risk and assurance committee meeting.
I think
I'm pretty sure we've got support around the table for that.
no, not at all.
Well, I know 2 or 3 people.
Oh, well, okay, that's not round the table. Chad?
No, I didn't, I said support.
So Chair, can I just clarify, are you saying that you would not, because I'm just listening to Guy say, actually, I haven't changed the delegations at the moment. What I've done is picked up and done basically a lift and shift from the old delegations into a new delegations format. So trusting that, that would imply to me that we could potentially approve this delegations policy, because at the moment the contracts committee isn't in the old one and it's not in the new one, but effectively then have a report back for a revised version coming back to the risk and assurance that reflects the contracts committee and reflects effectively clarification on delegate roles, as well as the fact that the committee may have more in-depth discussion about whether in fact the delegations levels that are proposed as changed are appropriate. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these options are fine by me. I mean, I think that between now and council, when this will be adopted, you could recommend that we make small tweaks. For example, the one that you mentioned about, it's not clear whether it's one or each of the delegates. I mean, it's each, and we can make that clear before council adopted it. So we can tidy up little things like that before it actually becomes, it doesn't come to force until council adopted in March. So if it was recommended tonight, we could make those tweaks ahead of council. But also, we could come back in May with a document that's been through each director that says, guys lifted and shifted it. The directors have reviewed for their directorate to make sure that they're comfortable that the right officers have the right powers. It's been through more of the process before it comes to you, rather than doing it the way that I proposed to do it, which is that we put it in and then we review it. We think we could do the whole review, including the major contracts thing, before May. I think all of these are fine. In terms of the risk of carrying on with the existing set of delegations, I mean, the existing set of delegations have been in force since 2018 at least. So, I mean, the risks are the sort of thing that get lawyers excited, but probably real risk is minimal. It's just untidy. And the idea of this was really, to use a topical analogy, was replacing a bit of unseen infrastructure that hadn't been given any attention for a long time and was crumbling. So we still need to do that, but if we do that now or in May, I don't think council's exposed to any different risks really. So I'm comfortable with any of it. I don't have any particular.
I would still support that. I'd like a more rigorous, because it's not only the delegations that are here. I've gone through some of the changes in the RMA. I've gone through some of who can sign off on the tenancy. So it's more than just having lots of people here. And I'm really comfortable to give my feedback to Guy or the CEO and yourself, Chair, and Kate around the other things. But I don't think that this is in a good enough position. I know that we've been working on this document since 2018, and I am unaware, but mind you, a lot of stuff hasn't come to us as governance, but I am unaware that any major jeopardy or anything like that has happened. I have to say I am disappointed that the contracts committee was disbanded, because I thought that it was a good safe check, and I have heard from some people that it was a good safe check. So I would like it to come back to risk and insurance with a more robust document.
Okay,
for us to look at.
yeah, I've got other queries. For example, on page 98, it talks
Yeah.
about the authority to commit council expenditure up to the following GST inclusive items.
Yeah.
But the budgets are GST exclusive. So, there's.
Again, all I've done is lift and shift the
Yeah.
document you already
So,
approved
yeah.
into a new format.
May I ask a question of councillors? Would you be open to other suggestions other than a contracts committee being re-established as the vehicle for doing what you want to do? I don't. have
whatever other
suggestions. I'm
options,
just,
yeah.
are you
Yeah.
wanting to open it up beyond reinstating? Or are you looking to reinstate?
Well, we can come back to that. What I suggest we do now is we'll test the waters in terms of whether we want to accept the new delegations or have them deferred. And so to do that, I would like to put forward recommendations from 2 through to 7. And if it's accepted, then that's what happens. If it's rejected, then the next motion will be about deferring it. So I just want to test the waters. So I'm going to move,
Can I say
sorry?
one more thing before you move those? Just another option might be that I bring the whole package to a workshop, so you guys can chew it over after our LTP season.
Well, yeah, but still got the recommendations
No.
are that. So, yeah, so.
Unrelated.
Yeah. So how you actually do it, that's another way. So I'm going to put recommendations, sorry?
I just want to discuss something on the table. I have no issue changing to the new format. I understand why we're doing it, make it easier to understand. But then there are a couple of changes of delegations, but only minor ones. I'd be happy to approve the change to the new format, hold those changes to delegations until we can review all the changes. And then, so that way the new format can get out, staff can understand it better, and it can be clearer and we can stop having these breaches. But then all the changes can come back at the later workshop. And that way we've got this new streamlined document and then we can understand. We've got this right out of the way instead of changing everything later and making it very cloudy. That way we'll get the new format out without the changes. So the changes would say exactly the same. The delegations would say exactly the same, but then have those come back rather than just kick it all to touch.
Just for councillor Newell, I asked general council, is that feasible? Or practical? Or possible?
Yeah, so we adopt the new format.
Yeah.
And then bring a more full review to a workshop, is that what you're saying?
Or just the next risk and assurance or whatever it was. Yeah.
But I think that you were also suggesting stripping out the changes that have been made.
Yeah, any of the actual changes to delegations would just be deferred.
I'm very relaxed. I mean that. I mean, I think it's really important that this committee understands its own council
Absolutely.
delegations and has a thorough and level of comfort with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's not the case now with the existing delegations. So I'm happy to take as long as we need to get there with the new delegations, so that everyone's had their chance to have their say and have a good look at it. So I'm relaxed. I don't think in terms of proper practice and correct risk and assurance, it matters too much whether we do that today or in May. So I'm very relaxed. But we do need to get there though. The current document is faulty.
I think councillor Bentley, your suggestion is a wee bit messy in my mind, and I'd rather either we adopt the new delegations with a right of that we need to discuss other changes, or we ask for the whole deferral of the document till the May risk assurance. I don't really support a halfway house on it. Councillor Newell.
Well, just a couple of things. One is if we deferred it to a workshop, then we have a problem for the independent member. So I wouldn't be in favour of that, but I feel as if there's two things going on here. One is the format and one is the content within it. And I see no reason why the format cannot be approved. And then later we just look at the content.
Which is what I was.
Exactly. I'm just endorsing
Yeah, thank you.
what you were saying.
Reiterated better than I did.
I think, Chair, unless anybody else has anything to say, I'm happy for you to go through either each of these recommendations one by one, or to take them from 2 through to 7 with the recommendation that you've got on the table, because I'd be happy to second it. I think that from a robust perspective, we have operated on something that hasn't changed since 2018. I would like more rationale and understanding of what these suggested changes are. I want to know that the ELT team gone through it and had a look at it and have come back with their recommendations, because from what I'm hearing, this is a wonderful piece of work that Guy's done and has probably put it together because it needs to happen. But for me, sitting at a governance level, it doesn't give me the comfort of what's been delegated and what's been said. So I will be voting in favour of your recommendation, and if you put it, I will second it, Chair.
Well, let's go through the process that I suggested originally 5-10 minutes ago. We'll put the standing recommendations first, and if they are not voted for, then we move to the next option, whatever their option is, which either is councillor Bentley's option or a deferment until risk May. So I'm going to put options in a block from recommendations 2 to 7. I'll so move. I will second it.
Guys, are we deferring to a next committee or to a workshop?
Next committee.
I think to the next committee.
Yeah, that's-
Because the workshop will involve all councillors.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
not
no.
what it should be.
Next week.
So I'm asking for a seconder.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Although any debate on this, hopefully not. Those in favour of those, agreeing to those saying yes to those recommendations 2 to 7, put your hands up, please.
Agreeing to defer.
No, we're going to accept the current recommendations that are on the paper.
So I'm just clarifying.
Yeah,
because you
no.
were-
You had a whole lot of
So the current recommendations are revoking the existing manual, implementing the.
No one supports that, Chair.
Right, so those in favour of that recommendation, please raise your hand. That is voting for revoking the current delegations and for approving the new delegations format. That is the recommendation
So just to
that we're voting
clarify,
on.
through you, Chair, just to clarify, that was what councillor Bentley and councillor Newell were
Asking.
asking. Is that correct?
I'm.
Why don't you just not put a vote to defer and I'm sure it'll get support.
You sure?
This has been lost.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll go back. So the motion on the table will be to defer recommendations 2 to 7.
Yeah.
And for officers to report back to the next Risk and Assurance Committee meeting
In May.
in May, in line with issues raised at this meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
After
Debated? None? I'll put it. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
All right, against? Right, carried. Now, I'd like to put on the table the last recommendation, which I'd like to have, please, is to note that the Risk and Insurance Committee has asked officers to bring back a paper on the process and options available to re-establish a contracts group or equivalent and give it the power to approve significant contracts. So that is quite explicit recommendation. So,
that, just note, they'd have to go to council, full council, just do it one hit and send it to full council.
okay. That particular one?
The contracts, yeah. I
Yeah,
don't see.
okay, right. Okay, so that, so that'll be to bring back a paper to council. Right, I'll move that. Second it,
I'll see.
councillor Bentley, any discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you. Right, got that. Moving on to the strategic risk management report. Agenda item number 6. Are there any discussion on that report, please?
Just got questions on the first deep dive. if we're
Yep, well, that's
ready.
all part of this now, question.
Cool.
Discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the infrastructure deficit, the target risk is high. I'm all about setting realistic goals, but is that aiming too low?
Do you need to go to which page? Sorry, just so you know.
133 of the report. Strategic deep dive, infrastructure deficit. On the right-hand side, the current risk is extreme, and our target risk is high.
For you, Chair, I'll start and then I'll defer to the CEO. All I would like to say is that is the risk that we set at the workshop when we went through this late last year.
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed, officers haven't changed that from the
Yeah.
workshop. Defer to the CEO on further detail.
Yeah, through you, Chair, look, I believe the risk has been set at that target at high because there's an acknowledgement that it's a very expensive and time-consuming process to actually get it to transition from even from its current most extreme level to high, and then even longer to get further down that scale. A lot of these bits of infrastructure, they have very long life cycles, and so the renewal life cycles for them tends to follow that.
Thank you.
Really, yeah.
Sarah?
I guess one of the things I'm really conscious of is that it ends up being a high by potentially having a high consequence and a possible outcome. In some ways, it's a bit of a nuance, but I feel more comfortable that it's a possible likelihood I'd feel less comfortable our target was that we were sitting in the likelihood, do you know what I mean, in terms of where that matrix is? I just wonder whether there's a little bit of a subtlety there, if you're looking at the likelihood.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, that's a really good point, because, I mean, in reality, you know, the sort of infrastructure we're talking about, the failure is never that catastrophic that it can't be repaired and a level of service maintained. For example, a pothole in the road may be severe, but it can be fixed. A break in the pipe may cause disruption to service, but it can be fixed. And so, yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you.
But also, it's not only that, it's also the funding risk. And that's where the Three Waters issue, and don't forget, this was done at the time when Three Waters was all up in the air in terms of which way it would go. And it's, in my mind, it's even more problematic because the coalition government's still not quite clear, even though it announced something just recently. And in fact, that actually pushes it all back to councils. And so in my mind, that in terms of funding, the ability to fund infrastructure, particularly Three Waters and roading probably, has got very problematic.
So I guess sorry, through you, Chair. I was okay, as an example, with that target risk being that downward arrow. I would be uncomfortable with it if I'm looking at that top right quadrant, if it was actually just going from right to left.
Yeah.
Would probably be my,
Any other questions?
Through you, Chair. My comment applies not so much just even for one of them, but a little bit more broadly. And it's a little bit where we are on our journey of doing these strategic risks, where we've kind of put them in place and we've had controls and actions. And I think it would be great to be able to take that next step, which is to move to a point where we have a bit more specificity about what would the controls mean, and having due dates around when things are actually going to happen. At the moment, the wording is quite loose. So there's things like engagement with, but it doesn't actually put any sort of measures or anything really tangible around delivering on them. So I just think it would be kind of just that next stage of maturity.
Do you mean under terms of a timeline or the next steps parts?
Well, I think the timeline and next steps takes it a little bit, but it's actually even more under the action plan.
Yeah.
So I think it's like the key controls, I think, are written in a way which is quite high level. I don't want to say wishy-washy, but they're kind of quite broad. And I think it would be good if they're able to be a bit more tangible. And likewise in terms of those action plans. And I realise that you're still trying to get it onto an A3 piece of paper, but I just think putting a little bit of that pressure and impetus behind it would be really good.
Rachel will take note of that. Any other questions? Councillor Griffith.
In the timeline of next step, had a review of the development contributions policy currently underway. Is that through the LGP process that we were talking about just recently, or is this another review that's going to be?
No, it's really Chair, that it's exactly that, and I guess the point that's just been made is that we can now put a date on that, is when that's going to be delivered.
Thank you.
So that's the debate we had. Yeah. Workshop.
Just focusing on the infrastructure deficit one of the other issues I guess I'm really aware of is that going through the LTP process, funding is constrained, still trying to keep rates at a reasonable level. You're going to come out of the back of this process without necessarily having this infrastructure deficit resolved. And at the moment, in some ways, the actions are very much, let's consider this in the LTP. And again, it's probably sort of next iteration. I think there's something there about how you're actually going to manage community acceptance of what's actually not going to be done. And actually, what is the time frame on which or how you're actually going to be prioritising and making decisions around which things are going to be focused on first, once the funding pool has actually been agreed.
So the community, consideration of the community consultation is in May. Is that right? In June, May, so it'll probably, the risk assurance committee probably before that is all finalised, so. Probably will.
Consultation document goes out the end of March.
In March. So it might be time for the next risk and assurance. Start of that
Council
discussion.
considerations made.
Yeah, so as I said, again, I was probably just thinking that the tone for the next iteration of it really probably just needs to change slightly.
And through the chair, of course, the biggest challenge we have is when the infrastructure strategy gets audited as part of the draft LTP, I think we may get some feedback through that avenue as to how successful or otherwise we are in terms of meeting our 30-year obligations.
Through you, Chair, to add to that, the Office of the Auditor General has been explicit in this, that in this LTP, they're expecting to see not a justification, but a statement. Statements on affordability or otherwise of deferred infrastructure spend. So they've been as clear as if you can't afford it, if you say you can't afford it, that they're looking to see that we're thinking about it rather than not including something we can't afford. That makes sense.
Just wondering whether you can elaborate on that a little bit in terms of your comment, which is you would expect commentary that comes from New Zealand, just in terms of what you've been running.
Yeah, through the chair, look, I mean, what we do know is that, and I guess it's probably at least the second LTP process in a row, not the third, audit have indicated very clear focus on infrastructure. And this year, I suspect it's perhaps going to be even sharper than it's been in the past. And what they're looking for in terms of that audit process is to check the alignment between your infrastructure strategy, which is, I guess, your wish list, and your financial strategy, which of course is your durability from a financial perspective, or affordability, I guess is a better way of putting it. And inevitably, the infrastructure strategy will identify needs that are always greater than the ability to be funded. And I guess what they are looking for is to understand what those gaps are, how we've identified them, and what we're intending to do to address them. And it's further complicated by our relationship. I mean, the relationship we have with Wellington Water, us being we still have asset stewardship responsibilities, but it is quite difficult at times to be able to satisfy some of the questions audit will be asking us. And we already know what those questions will be, and they already have a pretty good idea what our answers are going to be. Those questions will be asked. So it's how audit are concerned about how that gap between what you want to spend and what you can afford to spend gets addressed. And yeah, I'm guessing every council in the country is going to have that same challenge.
Through you, Chair, I agree that is what they're going to be looking at, and very much around what are the implications of that. So I guess I think audit might be doing that, yes, that's unaffordable or not, Kate, but I wonder whether they're also going to be looking at what does this actually mean for things like potential unexpected maintenance? You know, if we're actually not able to put this into a proactive, how are we actually going to manage unexpected levels as well? And what other levels of discretion we might have in the budget if in fact you end up with unexpected spend that ends up just having to happen. So I guess that's some of the flavour that I'd expect to see coming through into that next, how we're managing infrastructure deficit, coming through into that.
Yeah, and look, Chair, I think I can sort of just provide a little bit of reassurance around that, and that there is always a trade-off between your operational expenditure, which is patching the thing, versus your renewals expenditure, which is CapEx, and that's totally rebuilding. And so there always is a trade-off between those things, but what we have consciously done, for example, in relation to Three Waters, is that we've significantly uplifted the OpEx expenditure on the basis that as things break, we can at least put a Band-Aid on them and keep them going.
Yeah.
We may not be able to afford to renew them all just at this point in time, but we can keep them running. And so I think what we would be signaling is that that trade-off exists within our budget lines. And in an ideal world, you wouldn't do it that way around. Of course, if something was broken, you repair it, replace it. But we're having to repair, and we've recognised that by uplifting those repaired components within our budgets.
Any other questions? All right, so we'll, Chair.
I do have some questions on the other strategic risks, is that, if that's, okay. Just in terms of the community engagement one, I'm just conscious at the moment we do have full ELT associated. I know I've raised this before as a point, but I am interested in terms of understanding who's responsible for updating, reporting and monitoring on it. You know, does it actually sit with the CE to do that, or has this been delegated to a particular ELT member to have responsibility for it?
We did it in the ELT. So that's how it was done.
Through you, Chair. I do have one extra question then. I'm interested, there was some comments around about community engagement, about seeking the input from those who don't typically normally engage. And I'm interested in terms of what the council's doing, particularly as part of the LTP process, to get out to try and get those people who don't normally engage actually engaged in this process, given it is obviously such a difficult year with potential rates increases and cuts to services.
Liesl. Yeah, Liesl would probably be the best.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Can you answer that?
Yeah. Through you, Chair. We are following best practice engagement approach that we also used in the 2021 LTP engagement, which resulted that year in the highest ever long-term plan engagement levels that we've had with the community. So we've used that as our starting point and guide in the first instance, and have been very mindful in particular around the difficulty of communicating some of the key messages and information with this LTP and how we develop our engagement material as well.
Chair, I guess I'm interested in a little bit more detail about what you're actually doing to achieve that.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last comment.
I guess I'm looking for a little bit more detail about what are you doing to achieve those uptake and engagement levels?
Through you, Chair, we have a range of both open community and targeted engagement activities being planned at the moment. So that is still in development. It will have the councillors and key staff out across the community over the engagement period, you know, both for informal kind of drop-in type events right through to kind of more targeted specific engagements with key interest groups.
Perhaps you could send Sarah the list of proposed engagements we're going to do, or the list as it is at the moment.
Through you, Chair. Yes, happy to share that with the independent member as more information. That plan is still being developed at the moment, and councillors will be discussing it further at a workshop in at the end of February before we finalise that. But happy to share that.
Through you, Chair, probably the thing I'm most interested in is looking at the percentage of audiences not captured in the 2021 engagement and what things are being done differently to try and achieve a different outcome for this one with those audiences. So just to give you a little bit more focus in terms of what I'm interested in. Thank you.
You okay with that? Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Right, so there's no more questions. Shall we move on to the actual recommendation? So someone like to move that the committee recommends the council receive and notes the strategic management for Councillor Bentley. Second, please. Councillor Newell, any debate on that? No debate, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried, thank you. Moving on to item 7, sensitive expenditure report. Are there any questions on this report? No questions? Okay, so someone like to move the recommendation that the committee recommends the council receives and makes the sensitive expenditure report.
Excuse me, can I?
Do you have some questions?
Yes.
Very good,
Sorry,
councillor
Chair.
Slough.
Sorry, it's just that maybe for anybody externally, reading this report might think that it's not transparent enough or not enough explanation is around some of the expenses that have been incurred. And in particular, the one that immediately would come to mind is probably appreciating that His Worship gets physical invitations to go to places, and that they might appear as if he's just asking for us to pay for the parking. And one of those places would be to go to the Westpac Trust Stadium to watch games. I mean, it might be nice with a little bit more full explanation to say, actually, these are extended invitations by different sporting codes for him to attend these things. And it's up to him whether he chooses to go or delegates it to somebody else. And maybe just, when I look at other expenditure on some of the other items, people may not be aware of, they might look at the high costs under council expenditure where they will think, oh my gosh, we're overfeeding the councillors when they look at $1,300 and $1,200, not really appreciating that that was when we were disposed of this venue and that also incurred venue hire as well as food and equipment hire. So, just for a little bit more explanation for people, those of us in the room probably understand that, but anyone looking at those things may, expect a little bit more explanation, Chair.
Thank you, councillor. So I will, someone move the motion, please. Thank you, councillor Bentley, second. Thank you, councillor Griffiths. All those, any debate on the motion? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Moving on to the treasury report. Are there any questions on the treasury report? No questions on the treasury report? More than once, twice, 3 times? Right. Right, I'll move that the committee recommends the council receives the notes of the treasury report. Second, please. Councillor Sarah, you seconding?
Yep.
Very good, thank you. Any debate on the motion? If not, sorry.
I did actually have one question.
Okay, right. What were you thinking, were you?
No, I was just keeping on the toes. The interest rate risk timeline graph, the debt forecast and how we breach that policy. The policy next one.
Yeah.
And around the line there. How does that look with this new LGP?
Through to paragraph 13. Is that?
Yeah.
We've remodeled, this graph since then, in line with the 24-34 draft data. And we are in line with 100%. And currently we're at 70, modelling to 70%, like it says. but we're applying the new data. Yeah, we're in compliance.
We're in
100%, and we'll be looking at, moving forward, we'll be looking at 190 and 80 to the premise situation.
Okay, so we've got the motion on the floor, it's not being debated, and so I'll move the motion then, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried, thank you. Moving on to the internal audit report, basically this, a paper is just an update on where we're at with the internal audit program. So, you may recall that the Holidays Act 2003, the last risk insurance, and the expenses review had been considered, but the report hadn't been attached, so it's now attached to this agenda paper. And the next one we're going to be looking at the procurement review, which will come to the main risk insurance committee. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on that?
Through Chair, I'm just wondering whether I could have a bit more explanation around what a general ledger review entails and what that's designed to achieve in terms of the review.
Throw it out.
Through the chair, currently to develop our LTP, we do in Excel. We are looking to add what they call performance into our Magic system. We've taken Magic into the cloud to get the best out of adding that module. We want to review what's in the ledger because the general ledger's not been reviewed for a long time and it was used much like a project ledger. So the desired outcome is to understand how we can streamline it.
Chair. So one of my concerns about that, and I probably had a similar concern even in terms of the Holidays Act one, which is it feels like those are performance improvement projects, not necessarily audit type projects where I would be looking for reviews to be looking at, you know, compliance with policies and auditing performance. Does that make sense? Not necessarily being elements of determining, you know, how you might structure something that you already know is slightly broken.
Thank you. I think we need to understand how something performs before we can move to the next stage, is what I was trying to say badly. So it's understanding what we have, what works well, what has been, in my language, corrupted or, you know, isn't working well, before we can move to thinking about even what the next stage might be. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's understanding our environment before we can even think about what we might do in the future, I suppose. Because if we don't understand what we have, we're always in something new and let's failure.
So through you, Chair, I think it's absolutely worthy you should do it. I'm just not sure that it fits under what I would typically consider being an internal audit review. And I guess one of the things that I'm always probably just in terms of as an alternative thing, I'm always concerned about is non-financial fraud. So, because I think, you know, financials often get looked at by auditors, etc. Ones that don't often get picked up is where people are misusing equipment, whether that be infrastructure, heavy equipment, people misdoing timesheets or leave records or those sorts of things. And I guess that probably has a little bit more of a tone of what I would consider to fall under an internal audit than necessarily what I might consider, when you're talking about actually being more of a requirements piece of work that you might do for a systems improvement.
Perhaps the director might like to send to committee members the terms of reference and the outcomes from that review. I have come across and been involved in internal audit reviews of general ledgers before. The thing that the council officers are referring to, for example, are unable to use things like approval maps and HubDoc and those sorts of apps that would go with modern general ledgers like Xero, for example. And so whether Magic has those apps or not, or they can develop them, or in fact might come out of this, in fact, a replacement of the general ledger that is replacement of Magic. So I think it's really looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of the general ledger and the controls in and around the general ledger as well. So I think it is a worthy internal audit one, and it's been a bit of a thing that Kate has been concerned about. And in my observation as a chartered accountant, I've been concerned ever since 2016 about the 1950s or 60s tools that the council officers are using in accounting and financial management.
Thank you for that clarification, Chair and Director.
Cool. Okay, so are there any councillors? Well,
So with this, I know it's an interim report, but there are some outstanding issues that have been outstanding for quite some time. Do we think we will be able to address them and get them signed off in the time before we get a final or not? So when you
outstanding issues being
oh, sorry, I apologise.
right, you're still on internal audit.
I apologise.
Sorry about that. Right, and but it just raised that though, that then it does come out of internal audit that are outstanding items to be still to be addressed, and perhaps they could be included on future committee papers.
Please, thank you.
Right, so I'll move that the committee recommends the council receive the notes of the internal audit report, second to read. Yeah. You got a question or you? Okay.
Sorry. Got a little bit then. I'm just wondering on purchase cards, like 10, for instances where a card are basically overused. So the MasterCard services firm credit limits have been actioned. Does that mean that they're now capped at that? And why were they not?
Well, they were capped, but the bank was not observing the cap and allowed the transaction to go through over and above the cap.
Through you, Chair, yeah, the bank allows toggles. Transactions that toggle the $1,000 limit in that case to be processed.
Whereas when they signed for the Q card, it actually stated what the limit was, or they meant to implement that,
So
observe that limit.
supplementary to that in the future, it will be declined. And the bank.
Through you, Chair, as a bank, it's the bank school. So we ran the bank and that's the way they operate. And to say, I don't know the justification for it, but we have asked that they don't do that with our cards, but I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. That's it.
Strictly speaking though, if the use of the card was for non-authorised purposes, then the bank could technically be liable for that amount, that money, if it exceeded $1,000. So there is a bit of a risk for the bank.
Thank you.
So we have I was calling for a second for the motion, so Councillor Griffiths will second the motion. So any debate on the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Fine, okay, fine. And now we come to the agenda item 10, the final audit management report for 223, 223, and I believe we have audit office zooming in. Good afternoon. Would you like to provide any comments on the audit management report, please?
Thank you, Chair. There's no other additional comments I have. I'll probably take the report as read, and if there's any questions or comments on it, I can look to try and answer that.
Thank you. So I'll open up to the committee for any questions. Councillor Swan.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. My question is the same, and I apologise that I asked it at the wrong paper.
That's all right.
But are we looking at, there are some outstanding issues that have still been identified by Audit New Zealand that we are, haven't worked on it. Is there any, relief in sight that we might be able to pick up some of these non-compliance or these out of, they've been hanging, some of them been hanging around since 2023?
Through you two, we have looked at them all.
Yeah.
I'll be upfront, we had a change of staff at the end of March last year, and that was felt heavily. And we haven't recovered, I'm gonna be really honest. So yes, we've been through them all. Not all of them can be addressed. But we are mindful that they need attention.
Thank you. So I do have a question through for the audit office. I'm often quite concerned when I see systems controls that are necessary because, back in a world we actually existed where we actually had manual systems, and I would typically expect that it would be beneficial to be able to put them in a system, and the necessary component would be some manual workaround that would actually achieve the same control. Rather than actually requiring that it's a necessary system control. So just interested in hearing your view on that.
Yeah, I think if you had a manual workaround, if you're unable to, the system can't accommodate what you think is a control you'd like to have, you could quite easily put a manual control around that to achieve the same purpose. So as what our reports just highlighting that, your system does appear to have some of that functionality, enabling some of those controls, if you wanted to, could achieve, would then achieve some of those objectives, if you wanted to use the system to do that.
Through you, Chair. I was looking at the first bullet because that was probably the one where, as I read the comment from management, it implied that actually management had put in place a manual process for those journals to be second approved as a manual check. But I was surprised to see this sitting as a necessary recommendation rather than it just being a beneficial one. So that was probably the one bullet that I was probably noting there.
Yeah, I think with management's comment there, we'll look at that for next year as well, and just make sure that is is being done for all the journals. If there's a proper manual process that's been in place around, rather than using the system, that would be fine.
Thank you, Chair.
I think the point there also is that this particular issue comes up regularly in audits of all sorts of organisations in terms of manual checks of journals. So, it's been an issue that's been around for a long time. And even the most modern accounting systems, general ledgers, don't really provide an answer.
Through you to the Director of Finance and Risk and Digital Solutions, we've got another qualified opinion on our complaints, our water complaints. My understanding of that one is, say, due to the way that the call centre gets these complaints, they attach them to a ticket and then it's considered one job, whereas DIA would like us to count all those complaints separately. My question is, do any of the other Wellington Water councils use that Palmerston North call centre and have the same issue, or do they deal with it differently? And if so, have we considered looking at other call centre options to get this issue resolved? Because it seems like it keeps coming up.
Through you, Chair, the only council in the Wellington region that doesn't use that call centre is Wellington City. They have their own 24/7 call centre.
Okay, are we then aware, do they get the same qualified opinion, or do they have a workaround?
Through you, Chair, the same.
The same. Has there been any discussions at a level of, at the management level of, okay, how can we collectively get a solution here? Because we can't keep getting these qualified opinions without getting some kind of workaround.
Through you, Chair, there have been a number of responses from Wellington Water which indicate that in their opinion, fixed the problem is quite a long-term systems-based solution.
Yeah.
They would not be in a position to implement that quickly. I believe that same comment would be made available to audit. It certainly is being widely shared amongst councils.
Thank you.
Can I ask, Audit New Zealand, you talk about a qualified opinion, but this is just one part of the statement of service performance, so shouldn't it be an except for? Or I'm just wondering why we use the word qualified rather than except for in this particular statement.
So we did issue it is just one qualification on each of the measures. So it is an except for opinion. Otherwise, it is an except for. The service performance fairly states except for those measures, those respective measures that we've identified. I think with the Wellington Water one, some of the recommendations we've made there in the short term, as a short-term solution towards being able to report more accurately within this measure. I mean, the council does record all complaints, so the parent and all the child complaints are recorded. I think our recommendations talk to being able to clearly identify the respective child complaints back to the original complaint. If we're able to do that, we can start auditing those additional complaints. The second part of the recommendations would be to reconciling the data that Wellington Water is using to report on the number of complaints. And when we've compared that data, there are quite significant variances between that. So implementing a reconciliation process, the one that comes through in the report this year more strongly is around the financial side of a reconciliation, which council say they are doing some parts of that, but there's also the non-financial side. So reconciling those figures, making sure the figures are aligned between council systems and between council's figures and the figures that Wellington Water is using that's been audited by the auditor on that side, because we rely on that work. And then making sure that all the secondary calls or the children calls are clearly linked through to the originating call. Palmerston North After Hours Centre also records all the calls that come in. They would have the originating call as well as all the secondary calls. When council captures those into its own system, though, it needs to again make sure that those calls can be tracked back to the originating one. What else might come through from Palmerston North is calls that close out. If the phone call is dropped or whatever, or it wasn't something that could have been. It didn't result in a call out, so council needs to have a process to go through those calls to be able to either request the recording to try and understand what it was about. If they are a reasonable amount, you need to be able to, if we wanted to look at those calls, you should be able to say, well, what they were, or, they weren't actual calls for service, something like that. So there's a couple of short-term control processes that could be improved. And we were working through that last year with management, and we were hopeful to be in a position maybe this year where we could start looking at some of those aspects.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Chair. If I can just draw your attention, John, through to the section 5.9. I'm always concerned where I see, comments coming back from management where management do not agree, which it tends to imply that there was insufficient time or opportunity during the audit process to properly engage with management on the issue. So I'm just interested in hearing your comments on that.
So I think our recommendation was just to have a standard form that could be filled out and leave a trail, So I think management's comment, if I remember, they did disagree, but they were talking more to the process that was completed. There was a process that was done, and we wanted a formal, a form put in place to record it. So, we were contemplating putting an additional audit comment in there to say, well, trying to clarify whatever. But I think on reading that, we thought, well, management's talking to the process rather. They have accepted in the last part that they'll take that recommendation. So we didn't really add anything else on. And I think that our understanding of the last sentence was that they will put a noting in or a form in place that, you know, in future there will be some record of the decision. And, you know, if that, I mean, that's my understanding of that last sentence.
So could I just have an clarification there? So when you were doing the audit, apart from the H2O one, you found that there was no documentation signing off and disposals for any other assets that have been disposed of. In other words, there wasn't in place any documentation at all that recorded the disposal and who authorised the disposal. Am I correct on that?
So for the assets that we looked at, you know, it's just been a sample. We wanted to see like a formal asset disposal form, you know, to, I guess, so there would have been a process maybe followed. We would have been given other evidence around it, but we're saying, look, you should have just a form completed that shows that these assets can be removed from the register and you know, approved and signed off.
And that procedure would be in some manual of some sort, in terms of the property, plant and equipment policy manual or something like that.
Yeah, it just allows you to add in extra levels. It allows you to add in an approval, you know, that kind of thing. Controls around the process. It could be another type of asset like a notebook or anything else. You know, this is probably just a bad example because it's I mean, it's parts of a building, but you know, it could apply to others. So I mean, further than that, this was just based on our sampling. So with, you know, whether it's done for other ones, I think that we've taken that last comment as being that that'll be put in place going forward. There'll be a formal asset kind of disposal form.
So through you, Chair, sorry, I am going to just pursue this a little bit. Are you saying that there was no documentation? Because I wouldn't necessarily hold that it's a failing, that if there was actually documentation that would have included all the information that would normally be on some form of form, that actually was a failing. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is whether in fact, so a standard form shouldn't necessarily be the control, it's whether in fact there's actually sufficient documentation to authorise the disposal. So you're saying there was insufficient documentation to authorise the disposal? So
no formal documentation form saying these are the assets and this is, you know, authorising them for removal from the asset register. It's probably, I mean, it's part of a project, part of a, you know, there will be other information to support what was done was, you know, was fine. But I think in terms of this is more of a control-based approach. We're saying, look, there should be an asset disposal form when assets are approved for removal from the asset register.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions or comments from Freddie? You're okay, Sarah?
Yes.
No more questions? All right, so someone like to move the recommendation, please? Councillors, someone like to move the recommendation through? Councillor Bentley, seconded. Sarah. Any debate? No, so I'll put it to motion be put. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carry. Thank you. And thank you very much for your attendance. See you
Thank
next.
you, Chair. All right, we'll see you then. All right.
Right, moving on to the quarterly, only two more items to go. Quarterly compliance, legislative compliance report. Are there any questions or comments? Councillors?
Yeah. No, I don't have any comments.
Nothing?
No comments.
Right, okay. I'll move that the committee recommends the council receives and notes the quarterly legislative compliance report of 31 December 2023. Second, please, Councillor Swales. Any debate? I'll put it to the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carry. And lastly, we have the health and safety report. Questions or comments? Everyone happy?
Yeah.
Right, someone move the motion, please. Right, Councillor Swales and Councillor Bentley will be the seconder. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carry. Thank you. And that ends the Risk and Assurance Committee for the 14th of February. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
That's